Welcome, welcome. We have so many folks joining us today on this call. Just reading some more names in the chat. Just thank you so much. As new people join, please, write any information you want into the chat. Please connect with each other. Please use this as a way for you all to create community, to create connections. It's super important. It's why we're here. It's why we're doing this. So just want to say welcome. We're recording and we will share the recording out along with follow-up resources. So before we begin, as you can see, it's the three of us here today. We have April, myself, and Savi, and we're missing Brother Malik. He is unable to attend today, unfortunately. And so we know that although he is not here on this call, he shows up for his people all the time. And so we just want to send him love and gratitude for all of the good, hard work that he does. And we know that he's here with us in spirit. So we do have we have a great guest though, Savi Horne, who's going to be speaking with us on this overcoming barriers to land access. So I'll just introduce myself, Phoebe Gooding. I work for Toxic Free North Carolina, statewide organization with the mission to advance environmental health and justice by advocating for safe alternatives to harmful pesticides and chemicals. I manage the Just and Sustainable Agriculture program, promoting solutions to climate change, environmental and economic injustice, and avenues for self-determination and community resilience. So in addition to my advocacy work, I also have a small farm in Durham, North Carolina called Hawk's Nest Healing Gardens. And we are joined by our wonderful facilitator and friend, AprilJones. Hi, April.
Hi.
April is the founder of the Pinehurst Farmers Market, located downtown Columbia, South Carolina, in the Pinehurst neighborhood. And April advocates for her community as part of the food justice and food sovereignty movement. She's passionate about gardens and farmers markets and community. She's a writer, a photographer, blogger, YouTuber, recipe developer, and so much more. She contributes content to her blog, which is called Frolicking Americana. She also contributes content to Columbia Living Magazine, International Magazine's Mother Earth, and the National Farmer. So you can connect with April at Pinehurst Community Action on Facebook and on Instagram. It's Pinehurst Community Action and also Pinehurst Farmers Market. And so we're super excited to welcome you here today, Savi, to have this really great conversation with us. And just to introduce Savi, she's the executive director of the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers Land Loss Prevention Project. Savi completed 6 years of service on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council for the US EPA. She serves on the boards of the National Family Farm Coalition and the Rural Coalition. She's a member of the Coordinating Council of Black Land and Power Coalition and the leadership team of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. She's a recipient of the 2020 American Bar Association Section of Environment, Energy, and Resources Award for Excellence in Environmental, Energy, and Resources Stewardship. So as a state, regional, and national non-governmental organization leader, she is instrumental in addressing the needs of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and limited resource farmers and ranchers. Savi has a graduate degree from Rutgers University School of Law in Newark and a BA from City College of New York. Welcome.
Right.
Welcome,
Scarlett.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
And I have to salute my school, the Scarlet Knight.
All right.
Rutgers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just is my other colleague joining as well?
Oh, we also got a little note that family is family first. So
Okay.
we were hoping to have somebody who could step in for Malik and bring some, some other perspective and experiences, and isn't
Okay.
going to be able to do so. But we have full confidence that Savi can hold it.
All right, I will do my very best, but I just want everyone to know they're part of this community. It's just not a static webinar where you just listen and I'm talking at you. Let's talk with each other, put in the chats. And I don't know, I think the intervention is probably limited in terms of seeing you all, but if you put in the chat your comments, not just questions, but comments, share your perspective. I think we could have a very robust time together. I don't purport to know everything, but as the Godfather of Soul said to the rappers, I taught them everything that they knew, but not what I knew. So I am including James Brown, and in that regard, though he's a little interesting, and he's an interesting person, but he's part of our system that we grew up with, at least in my generation. So here I go. Really want to thank all of you for joining. And I really thank you, Phoebe, for having me here. And I hope that I cannot step in the shoe entirely of Baba Malik, but I just want to acknowledge, I feel his presence, his work speaks for itself, an extraordinary food system thinker, and as he would always say, and a Pan-Africanist. So I just want to salute him, send him love, and we hope to rejoin with him at another time. And just a shout out to my colleague, Chanel Nestor, who had stepped up to the plate and due to family is not here with us, but we know that we got to take care of our base, because that is the source of our strength. So yeah, so here we are together. And I just want to acknowledge and pay homage to the fact that where I'm sitting and where the office is, really the office in Durham, I want to acknowledge that our office is located on 2 Native American tribal land, the Eno and the Occaneechi, and they're related to the Sioux people. They lived and they farmed here in Durham. Durham also was the home of one of the largest plantations in the Southeast, the Stagville Plantation, with upwards of 30,000 acres and home to almost 900 enslaved African Americans. So this is sacred ground for African Americans, Native Americans, and for all who dwell within, pay homage to this rich heritage that has imbued the spirit of Durham and our work. And let's not forget, they once were here, they continue to be here. And as we look at decolonizing the food system, let us also decolonize land ownership and get it back to a more collectivized model so we can all live on the planet together. So yeah, so I just want to welcome, just really broadly embrace everyone. I just want to mention that Land Loss as an organization, the Land Loss Prevention Project of the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers had its start close to 40 years ago. It's now 38 years. And the impetus for that was due to the 1980s farm crisis, particularly farm crisis of the South and the Midwest, and how it was adversely impacting rural America, and was almost, African-American farmers almost completely left the landscape had it not been for interventions by some of our leading NGOs in struggle, the Rural Coalition, the National Family Farm Coalition, Farmers Legal Action Group in Minnesota, and the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and others, too numerous to mention, but they're within our collective ecosystem and spirit, that came together and really worked really hard to get debt relief passed and to get a more progressive management in place in terms of regulatory process at the Farm and Home Administration, which is now the Farm Services Agency. And with that and definitional change, we were able to get, beginning to get some relief on debt. So it is from that place where we arrived on the scene in 1983, studied what was going on in the Black Belt of Eastern North Carolina. And to be noted that the Black Belt extends all the way southwest to Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, the Carolinas, all the way up to Southern Virginia. And while this was a feature of geology, it was steep in terms of its planting aspect in human brutality of slavery. And it is from that place that I speak, and it's from that place that African-American farmers have reasserted their collective ownership of the Black Land Commons, which is emerging as a way in which we can begin to think through collective models of land ownership that liberates the land, liberate our spirit, give our families resources to grow, develop, educate, plant, agitate, educate. And so within that back belt of the South, one would say that really defined the soul of the South, the Black Belt. It gave us everything from our music, our poetry, our literature, and the flight of imagination and the ability to come together and demand justice and to fight collectively for civil rights and transformation of the United States. And it's very interesting that during this period of, I would call it the classic period of the civil rights movement from 1954, and 1954 being the beginning of the school desegregation, that major victory in Brown versus Board of Education. So that year tends to be the traditional marker for the period of civil rights movement. So it's 1954 to 1969. It also coalesced with the rise of the Black Power movement, which would kind of continue past 69. So in terms of just delving in a bit more into the background of Black land ownership, which I think is critical to understanding what the future, how we can reclaim that rich heritage, replant our community, our agrarian roots, and be able to live in those beloved and beautiful communities of our imagination that we want to actualize within our lifetime. So when we look at the civil rights movement, a lot of people may ask, well, really, what really led to the massive loss of Black folks? Some people might say, well, it was the great migration of African Americans from the Deep South to the Northern and the Midwest industrial belts. But it was more than that, because most of the people who left were not farmers. So for us, when we look at what was happening in communities, it was the crushing weight of Jim Crow segregation and white terrorism in the countryside, and the fact that Black folk needed to survive and had to move forward with their lives. So the migration is part of the narrative of Black land loss, but it can't be pinned on just that one thing. One must look back of the history of theft and intimidation and discriminatory practices by even the US Department of Agriculture and its local agent in preventing the, or at least attempt to prevent success of Black farm culture. But it thrived and it survived, and it really largely survived because of the community and the will of communities to keep Black farmers on the land. It was not necessarily due to any kind of government action, but it's the will of the community and the resiliency of the community and Black farmers, why we still have that rich agrarian heritage. And for the first time since the 1960s, since that classic civil rights period, we begin to see an uptick in the numbers. I always like to kind of help people to just kind of visualize what I'm saying, and I think numbers can do that. And so when we look going back to that classical period of 54 to 69, if we look at the data that's there and that was published by African-American writers on the land question, and in a book called The Black Rural Land Ownership, Endangered Species, Social, Political, Economic Implications, and it was edited by Leo McGee and Robert Boone. It's dated, it's from the 1970s, but it's really rich in data that is very hard to find in one place. So according to the data in the book, in 54, in North Carolina, we're looking at North Carolina now, there were 22,600 farmers, and that by 1969, you were down to 9,600, representing more than a 50% decline in the number of Black farmers within the classical civil rights period. And within that same period, in 54, you had almost 1.1 million acres of land in ownership by Black farmers. And then by 69, it was basically reduced to half by about 558,000. So in looking at that, one can really begin to appreciate the devastation that was happening in the Black community with regard to land ownership.
Can you say,
yes.
Sorry, Savi, can you say the name of that book one more time? Somebody was asking, and I'll definitely follow up with it in our resources, but okay. I know it was a long title. I didn't catch it all.
All right, I'm gonna drop it in the chat. I'm gonna get fancy, y'all.
Oh, with that.
My fanciness comes at a price, I'm afraid. And I'm okay being a Luddite, by the way. I mean, seriously. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it.
Right,
I
so
see it.
it's probably a rare book now. And so, but it's rich in context and interesting. Maybe the National Black Food and Justice Alliance might be able to, Black academics, to see if somewhat we could get a reproduction of that book, and that it becomes part of the commons on the literature of the Black land question. So yeah, that might be a project for the Black academics in the movement to try to get at that.
So with that in mind about Black land ownership, I know that here in South Carolina, we've had new legislation that has passed regarding heirs property. And so Thomas Mitchell of Texas A&M law professor was really one of the people who was spearheading it across the nation. And so 17 states have now taken on the Uniform Partition of Heir Property Act, which basically gives due process to families to protect them from speculators and from bad practices, bad legal practices that have occurred, especially here in the Deep South in South Carolina. And so what are your thoughts about how we as a community can really advocate for Black farmers and for Black people of color regarding land access?
Yeah, so let's sort of situate heirs property and the problem of it, and let's separate out somewhat the heritage that was being sought. So the ancestors created a system by default of kingship land, and I kind of like to think about it as the village system of our ancestors, right? Transatlantic wise, culturally speaking. And so by not going to a lawyer and going to a court and perfecting a will and doing all the titling for your land, it, upon their passing, it became family land and devolved into an estate that was one of the weakest structured estate under law of tenancy in common. And from the heritage of kingship land, you also get to a place where it becomes so vulnerable to through the machinations of using state law to get at it. And it wasn't just partition actions, but you could also lose it from tax foreclosure and other means. So, and I really credit the work of everyone in South Carolina to get the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act passed, because it took really on the ground activism to get it done. And it almost was skillfully organized around Reverend Pinckney, and strategically by naming the statue after him, that then helped within the political process of state legislatures in South Carolina to show up. You're living in communities with Black folk, you got to show up right and do right. And so armed with that, armed with the strategic positioning of the law and the background and the work of Professor Mitchell and others who were part of the Uniform Law Commission, you were able to get through the adoption certain benefits for families. So one of them that may be more in use is the ability to have a cool off period where families could come together and assert the buyout provision come together and buy the land from the heir or somebody else who has bought in a percentage for the land, because it could be a developer who had bought into that family land and now is asserting his rights under state law by using the partition sale that would get at the land. And the ways in which the courts were managing that would be just to sell the land and divide up the proceeds amongst all the heirs. So then, of course, that led to a lot of land loss within our community. So this is really still one major tool in that as a resource to families who are dealing with heirs property situation, particularly who are facing a sale or a partition action that may result in a sale of their family legacy. That is one tool. It's also a critical piece in the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, that for the first time in 150 years, if you will, since the founding of the Department of Agriculture, Black landowners who have been farming on heirs property can now assert and protect their right and be able to get into programs of the USDA by proving that they are farming on partition, heirs property land and getting resources from Department of Agriculture, chiefly Farm Services Agency, to quiet title. Now that provision is that heirs property retention program that's part of the Farm Bill. And while the money is sitting there, that has yet to be implemented. And it's one of the things that the community of practitioners and communities at large are looking forward to having that in place. So when a situation occurs where a farmer wants to stabilize ownership, they're able to do that and to keep the land within the family. So that's one aspect of doing that.
And speaking of communities in an urban setting, so I live in Columbia, South Carolina. You guys are in beautiful Durham, North Carolina. So we're both in the Carolinas. It's exciting. Baltimore, yeah, it's for people. Baltimore has a really interesting program regarding vacant land. And so that's something that does occur in, a more urban setting where, especially in Black and Brown communities, you read about redlining and you read in The Color of Law, the book, how communities are redlined and they don't get access and they don't get the loans to put on a new roof and to put on new siding, et cetera, et cetera. So then these homes are condemned by the city, and then the city comes and mows them down, and then you have these vacant lots. And so, especially in cities that have lots of people of color, lots of areas that have been redlined, you have all of these huge swaths of city land that are vacant. So in Baltimore, they did a great program where you can rent a lot, utilize the lot up to 5 years, and then it's put in a land trust for the community to use. So what are your ideas about what communities can do to come together to combat the issue of vacant land in urban settings?
Well, as you correctly point out, part of what led to it, and the reason why they are in such abundance in our community, is a flight of capital away from our community. Even as we spend so much money on inferior food and get and less services, we don't get all the benefits that we need. So the movement, and a lot of it was around guerrilla farming. And so Baltimore tends to have one of the most progressive regulatory process when it comes to vacant land, and how community and local residents are able to access the land to grow food. But like most places, it's okay when the land is not in demand, right? But once the spectra of gentrification, and that's sort of the unintended consequences of fixing up your neighborhood with the food space and it becoming more attractive to other folk want to move in and become part of that, part of the food culture. Sort of more on the speculative side of ways in which African-American becomes part of the cultural background for so many things, right? Whether it's the jazz in New Orleans, you know, or so, you know, whether it's to get involved in the food ways and culture of Black folk, then has a certain primacy in some people's worldview. And so land, and we're seeing that happening in Detroit, which would have been really wonderful if Baba Malik was here to talk about the Detroit story of reclaiming land. Of course, the Detroit community farm is a very good example of when the community comes together and self-determine, and as well as to work legal processes so that it's protected, how amazing that could be, and then to be able to negotiate and get the land and be able to now be in a position to build a food co-op that is responsive to the African American communities. Those are amazing feat, and just goes to show the level of organizing that has been happening in Detroit to get to that place. So I do see that there's some very good aspect to the work of Department of Consumer Affairs and whatever department it is, and so I'm blanking right now, planning in Baltimore, but more needs to be done to really, really secure land. We're not into this modern sharecropping, right? Where you work the land for a while, then you lose it. It's a community investment that needs to be recognized as community capital and needs to be solidified in ownership of the land. I think one of the best places to really elevate this discourse is attendance at Black urban growers conferences, and to be part of that forum and organizing around some of these questions, I think would be pretty critical. Okay, thank you for that piece. I just, that was dropped in.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions in the Q&A.
Sure.
Okay, let's see. So Florence would love to connect, collaborate, is from Bread for the World. They're having conversations around what they can do differently around the Farm Bill, what we all can do differently around the Farm Bill to address the things that you're speaking of.
Yes, so I do know the great work that Bread is doing. And I was part of their process with Dr. Angelique Walker around the UN Food Summit. And I think they skillfully invited in Black farmers to participate in a process to inform the UN process. And I think that was really very strategic. So yes, I'm really excited about Bread and their work. And Bread is not coming at this new. Bread has been involved for a very, very long time in food policy work in the US. And it's not always coming from like a hunger perspective, but how to build community around this. So I just want to do a major shout out for Bread and the role that they have played.
And then our other question from Joseph, works for a nonprofit land trust in Iowa, working to protect farmland specifically for sustainable food farming. They receive land donations and use agricultural conservation easements to protect land that can be transitioned to farmers that need to access the land to grow. So Iowa's predominantly white demographic. Nearly all the land is owned by white families. So do you know of land trusts that are having success with transitioning land to those who need it most, and any organizations that they could connect to?
It's sort of a work that's in progress with traditional land trusts. It's a work in progress. I want to think in the Southeast, one of the most advanced would be the Athens Land Trust, and that would be a place to start if you want to look from the Southern perspective. But, you know, I believe in home rule, if you will, with Black folk and our self-determination. And I think the best place to start is to look at the fact that African Americans organize a legal structure of the new communities, the first US community land trust. So studying that model and working from there is a very good place. But with regard to principally white land trusts, they need to understand how they can really work with communities, be attentive to communities, and be able to convince communities that they're walking in lockstep with the community, and that they want to see the growth in the land commons, the Black land commons, and that, you know, they're willing to go the extra mile by really working their boards. I think boards could be very problematic. I think you can have a very progressive staff, executive director, but you got to convince your board, and that they have to begin to see that by making land available to BIPOC community, that's what it's about. We don't want a re-entrenchment of private land ownership in a commons that is owned by community land trusts. I mean, come on. You remove it from in the main, and then you're going to re-engineer it back into communities. So that process has to be very well thought out and be really engaged in the community. And part of the problem is that you don't get community bennies because you have not really been engaged in the community. So you really do need to work the community process to get to the place of legitimating those activities, and really listen to really what the farmers are saying who want to participate, and what they need, and connect them to other resources that's in the Black land space as well. It ain't about just your organization and its work, but it needs to connect to the wider movement of the Black land commons and that conversation.
I really, really appreciate that answer, Savi. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, it's remembering that it's not just about a transaction, you know?
Yeah.
It needs to be so much deeper, so much more. Thank you.
And to the person from Iowa, I think there needs to be more strategic alliance with the Black community in and around the state, as well as the refugee communities, and a lot of them are people of African descent, Somali, for example. These are people who know agriculture, and if you look at how Maine and Vermont has been working that process, I think that could be a way forward.
So what do you think are some celebrations in the land movement, and ways that we as a community can support more equity in land access?
Celebration. I don't know. I kind of...
We got to celebrate good times.
Yes, we do, but I kind of like... No, I don't poop celebrations. It's just it takes a lot. So let's acknowledge that there's been a lot of momentum forward in rural spaces, and a lot of thought has gone into like policy development that have transformed some rural towns and have really empowered the growth in Black-led, community-led organizations that are directly dealing with food and culture at that intersection. So we're seeing more of that movement. It's say in Mississippi, and one I would like to uplift the SIP culture that that does the education, the farm, the musicality and culture of Mississippi together and empower community and is transforming community. I think the new rise in collective ownership that we're seeing in urban centers of next generation urban farmers coming together and nuancing how they can collectively own processing facilities, community kitchen. To me, that's a bright light, and that needs to be acknowledged, that is an innovation in ownership, style, and structure that needs to be promoted. And I think in some places you do have more favorable legislative environment, regulatory environment. So I just want to celebrate the fact that you are seeing more elevation of the culture and the foodways, just beautiful things happening in cultural and ecotourism initiative that was initiated by nonprofits and local government, development of the Gullah Geechee corridor that is celebrating that rich heritage of Gullah Geechee culture and its contribution to Black folk and their heritage throughout this country. And so I want to uplift that, and I also want to uplift the fact that I see as a result of the George Floyd uprisings, national uprisings, and the pandemic that just blew open the racial and health disparity conversation, that philanthropy seemed to be stepping up in terms of its giving and really working with BIPOC-led organization to legitimate their process and the community's process. So I think that's a big score. I think to have gotten one of the most progressive farm bill in terms of on racial equity in an otherwise regressive administration of the Trump presidency is something that I think all progressive ag people need to elevate and celebrate and to pay attention to the implementation of those provisions, and do what you can to continue to grow the adoption of the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, because it does help. It is one tool in the toolkit to prevent foreclosure, which is a big part of the practice of land loss. It has become, because it continues to be a problem within African-American communities, low-income communities, BIPOC, limited resource communities, of holding on to their homes and land is to be able to do the foreclosure defense, the education, the need to work wills and estate, to give people, put that in place for people in communities. And I want to elevate the fact that finally, FEMA listened. And now heirs property, if you can prove you're on heirs property, and it's a very low threshold of proof that you live in the home, you have a driver's license, you pay electric bill, you pay taxes, you can now have access to FEMA's emergency relief and be able to rebuild. This was not the case. This was a long time coming. It took Katrina for folk to realize that New Orleans was also one large kingship place, village. And a lot of the homes, you know, were in heirship. It was great grandma's home, mother's home. They passed on, there's no title. And so the road home was made very difficult because you couldn't prove ownership. And now there were some reworking using the tenancy in common agreement that you can come together as tenants in common and you can prove and you can say that there are people living in this home and therefore they need resources to rebuild. So that eventually happened, but it really did come too late when, you know, as a result of our people from New Orleans and that and greater New Orleans became adrift, but at least our communities were welcoming wherever they were in you know, out in California, where they were in Texas, North Carolina. There were some people of our people made it all the way up and replanted themselves within African American communities here. So that goes to me. I think all of what we've seen has helped us to rebuild and connect with the fact that we are a resilient people, and we have existed because our ancestors have existed, and we will continue to exist, and we will continue to humanize this here in the United States. So yeah, I see a lot of, I tend not to be pumping good because there's so much work. I don't want y'all to take your foot off the brake. We have a lot of work to do. We got now, so this is the thing. So in the midst of all this pandemic and inequality and disparity, we are now at a critical point for the survival of the planet. So now we have to deal with legacy pollution and human rights. And we need to, the primacy of human rights, we can't slack off. We have to come to terms and deal with everything in our lifetime, in your lifetime, Phoebe, and most of the people on this, in this webinar. It has to be done, there's no question. This is our only planet home. We have to honor the first people, you know, in this country and work to protect the environment and decolonize the food system and the way in which we have been living, because we cannot afford to continue to live in that manner anymore.
Excellent points.
April.
Phoebe, do you have any more questions?
Best friend. I have to say this because I plan to come see you in Charleston, but I do mean it too. Go ahead.
That's great.
Oh my, what happened to the time?
Oh yeah, that's happened. I'm getting so engrossed just listening to Savi. I'm just like nothing else exists. I just want to be here listening right now to all of this. So it's been great. I think we had two things come through. One come through the chat I want to try to go back to, and somebody asking a question around the so-called integration that closed all Black consolidated schools in the South. And just, you know, wondering about that link, because these schools had definitely a place for community, you know, a place for people to come to learn, to be together, to organize, you know. So wondering if there's links that you know of or can speak to that has this impacted Black land loss, is kind of the question.
Can you rephrase it?
Okay.
That I was busy working the chat.
Okay, so somebody's question is here about so-called integration closed all Black consolidated schools in the South, destroyed small rural communities. During Jim Crow, rural residents connected countywide through their children and through these schools. The schools served, places for community functions, all. And so they're wondering about links and the impact. Are there links? Is there a direct impact on Black land loss that you can speak to?
Yes, and I think that is the case. And I think there's been a lot of work looking at, say, small rural communities in Alabama, and particularly what happened to the demise of Black rural schools due to integration that has been done at Tuskegee. So I would begin to look at the work of Dr. Robert Zabawa and from Tuskegee, and his colleague Connor Bailey from Auburn. They have really laid the foundation to respond to what you're doing, but saying around or thinking about so-called desegregation, which has bled into now gentrification. So I really do feel that we lost a lot during that period of land, and not only that, institutions, financial institution, education institution, that really was the fulcrum. That's where we got the energy to move forward in the civil rights period. So I think there can be a look back in that period to really figure out how segregation really led to very negative consequences in our communities. And I think that Dr. Monica White book on freedom farmers does have information on that piece of lost heritage because of desegregation.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. I know we're coming here to the top of the hour. I think there was a question in the chat around just expanding on the Farm Bill. So I think that's information we can send as follow-up. We'll be sending out this recording to folks. So we can follow up with this, more actions to take, more ways to learn about heirs property, more ways to learn about the Farm Bill, more ways for folks to learn and to get involved. So just really want to thank you, so much, Savi. Want to thank you for bringing this super rich discussion where I could honestly just sit and listen for 3 more hours. So, and just really want to thank everybody for being here, bringing their whole selves, showing up, connecting with each other. Just want to really thank you all for, doing this work together. We got to do this work together. So this has been, I just want to bring it a little bit full circle and say that this is the 4th of the series. Our first opened with an Afro-Indigenous farmer and really helping us ground in where we are and our land and the land acknowledgement in place. We also, that was Crystal Cavalier Keck, and we also had Jory Bryant on, who is a direct descendant of the Stagville plantation that Savi referenced earlier, one of the biggest plantations around here. So just wanting to really uplift that, hearing the stories from the folks on the ground here doing the work is really important. So keep that listening ear open, keep listening for those stories, letting those people talk who need to be doing the talking. Our last one of these conversations on food justice is at the end of October, the 28th, from 4 to 5 p.m. And we will talk about farm workers and agricultural labor, because farm workers are on the front lines pesticide exposure, human rights violations, myriad of other issues. And we have to pay honor to those who
Absolutely.
put the food on our plates by listening
Absolutely.
and learning about individual and collective steps that we can take for systemic change to improve working and living conditions. So that's how we're going to wrap up this series. But thank you, Savi.
Yeah, well, I really thank you for having me, and I thank everyone who's attended for keeping company with each other, with me, and we move forward.
And we do it together. Don't forget that. We do it together. Thank you so much, everyone. Have an excellent evening.
Yes. Remember, it's Oktoberfest, one of the bennies of the agricultural system.
Nice.
All righty.
Okay. Good night.
Good evening. Good night.